The Ordinary Discussion Podcast.
Imagine that for hours, or just repeatedly being like ignored by people. How dehumanizing that is. And you know, the greatest, I always say the greatest rejection in mankind's history is our rejection of Christ on the cross. And so the beauty of that is when you're begging, you get to participate in his rejection on the cross. If we ever feel alone or lonely, depending on how you look, you know, that's not always the same. Just remember that Christ was pretty much alone on that cross, bearing the weight of all of our sins. And there's something powerful about that. And anyone who has ever been homeless, like, they're participating in that rejection.
Let's do this. Thanks so much for tuning in to part 2 of our podcast with DK, Daniel Kalin from Vail, Colorado area. We have an exciting podcast today. We're going to discuss his poverty, what's it called? Poverty immersion.
Poverty immersion.
Poverty
yes.
immersion, where he was homeless for 30 days in Kansas City in January with $5 to his name. But before we jump into that, if you haven't listened to part 1 of this podcast, I'd encourage you to go back and do that. DK had some great things to say, some real good strategies on how we can grow closer to the Lord and read his word and grow in intimacy. And I thought it was a really interesting conversation from a really fresh perspective. And yeah, absolutely. It was awesome. It's good to have a young guy on the show too. He's nearly half my age. But yeah, DK lives here in Colorado. He was going through a seminary to be a Catholic priest. He's put that on hold for a couple years, may or may not jump back in that. Until then, he's working as a development director at a local school, St. Clair, a CC school. And he's just really invested in the youth of our area, and he's a great guy to have around. He invested in my son as a football coach and such. So just a wealth of knowledge, ton of energy, loves the Lord. And so in part 2, we want to talk about this poverty immersion. But before that, how you doing, DK?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We have the same clothes on from part 1 because we kind of just went back to back. So if anybody's wondering, we could have changed shirts or something.
Yeah, I could have put the jacket on or act like, man, it's a totally different day out there.
Yeah, we could have put some mud on our face, made ourselves look like we were out doing something. Yeah,
flip your hat around.
Yeah, that would have done it. That would definitely confuse everybody. No, but let's get going. So this poverty immersion.
Yes.
So I mentioned it a little bit, as I understand it, and you can explain it more. Part of this 1-year spiritual journey is you have to experience poverty and this immersion into poverty. And there's many different ways of doing it. The one that you got so lucky to get is this immersion into almost homelessness, right?
Pretty much, yep.
And so explain to me what that looks like.
So, poverty immersion. We do at our seminary all sorts of different types of poverty immersion. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually they keep it sort of on the lockdown. So
we're not allowed to talk about this?
No, we can talk about my experience, but
we can't talk about the rest.
I was going to go and start like naming all the different and then I was like, oh, Jiminy Crickets. I didn't even think about that. There might be some guys discerning seminary.
I haven't heard Jiminy Cricket since my grandmother, and she's been dead for about 15 years.
I have a bunch of those. All the kids at St. Clair, they make fun of me. They're like, you swore. And I'm like, what did I say? And they're like, shoots and boots and Jiminy Crickets.
Do you say fiddle farts?
I don't say that one. Good.
We would have to cut that out if you did.
I don't blame you. No, Jiminy Crickets is definitely my go-to. Son of a Biscuit is for sure.
Great. You almost got me for a second.
I know. It's I get the kids with that too. Or what's another one? Yeah, I have all the replacement words for sure.
Yeah, great. Okay, so Jiminy Crickets, you were going to say, you were about to mess up and say something you weren't supposed to.
That's right. But I mean, there's just, they send us out on all different types of poverty immersions. You could be working at a soup kitchen or in a drug rehab program with drug addicts. They really discern what is the best poverty for that those two individuals. They send us out 2 by 2. You never do it alone. I love that you're switching the hat.
I'm switching my hat so people think it's a different day. I'm probably making a ton of noise too.
They're like,
there you go.
Oh, different day, different person.
Very good.
I just stay the same always.
Yes.
But no, they send us out 2 by 2. You never go by yourself. And it can be all sorts. My poverty immersion was focused on a poverty of things, a poverty of material. You went to Kansas City, which, having grown up in Colorado, is very, very different than Colorado. I mean,
Midwest, baby.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, there were maybe a solid 2.5 weeks where I did not see blue sky, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is miserable.
No, people, it's funny. I grew up in the Midwest, and I moved from, the East Coast, and people were like, how can you live in Colorado? It snows so much. Is this, that? I'm like, yeah, but first off, in the valley, it's gone by noon. Even in like January, February, I mean, it melts off so fast. It stays on the mountains. And then I'm like, when it's not snowing, it's just like the most beautiful sunny skies there is. You just wear like a puffy vest and jeans, and you're not even cold. Like, no. Now it's cold in the mornings. I'm not gonna lie.
Yep.
But anyhow, yeah, I think it's when you said you were there, you had to do this poverty immersion in January in Kansas City. The Midwest in January,
nasty.
It is cold.
It was
because it's that
fun.
humid cold, man.
That's the thing. I had never really gotten that like bone chilling. Like you can't get dry. You can't like the cold that goes to your bones. And when they tell you,
let's get into this. I want to. So you got $5 and you got shipped there.
Yeah,
on a bus.
So that's
Greyhound.
The Greyhound is its own experience. Have you ever ridden a Greyhound before?
I haven't, but I've seen some of the characters come off of it, so I can only imagine.
Oh my goodness, that in and of itself, like the Greyhound trip there and back, I could talk days about that. It's a journey, that's for sure. But so first off, the way they do this is, I mean, there's some things in seminary where they pick your name out of a hat, and that's how they make a decision. I know one order where they send their priests, and they'll pick their name out of a hat and pick a location, and that person is going to live and be a priest in that place for the rest of their life.
Oh, wow.
Which is super intense, but I couldn't do that, that's for sure. But so for this, they actually do a lot of discernment. They're like, what would be a good team? Who do we want to send together? Are they going to, rub against each other and sharpen the sword, sharpen the iron, or is it going to dull out? And so they discern that, and then they discern where you're going. And then in January, they you come back from Christmas break, which is very short. It's like a 4-day, get to see your family, which is nice. But you come back and they're like, okay, get you in a classroom. You don't necessarily know when or where or what, but this is how they did it. They're like, go into the classroom, gave you a bunch of locations on the board, and then it was sort of like a drawing, like a prize, Jeopardy or something.
So
like
this was
that.
random.
It was, I mean, not random, but like the way they announced it, they do it with a light heart. It's not like, you are on a mission, like you've been chosen. It's everyone's like cheering each other on and like, oh, you get to go there. You go in and you see San Francisco or like all these different cities, Miami, and you're like, that looks really nice. Or you see Kansas City, and you're like, I hope I don't go there. And but they each have their own, and like when we all come back together as a community of men, it's also really fascinating just to hear like the dinners for the next month are just all, oh, let me tell you about this thing that happened to me on poverty immersion, or I had a shotgun shot at me. What about you? We've never had anyone killed on poverty immersion.
Well, that's good.
That is a good thing. And some of the rules about poverty immersion is you can't go out and like wear clerics. Those are those black clothes.
I was going to ask you about what you wore.
Yeah, you just got to wear regular clothing. You can.
Okay, so you get in this bus, you go to Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I'm taking
No.
So What do you have on you?
The clothing on your back, maybe a small bag if you're lucky. Like they give you like 20 minutes to get to the bus. They're like, well, we have vans, so they're like, in 20 minutes we're leaving for the Greyhound bus station. Here's your ticket, your packet.
But do they limit what you can bring?
They do limit what you can bring. You certainly can't bring like a wallet and you shouldn't have money or a cell phone or like anything like that. So, you
get a sleep. Where do you? So they drop you off in the city, and you're like, boom, okay, never been here before. I don't know where I'm at.
Yep.
And you have $5. That's the amount.
You have $5. They do give you like an emergency contact sheet, and remember, like, especially in most cities, there's a Catholic church on. If you were ever in desperate need, and this is why I'm like, people are like, that sounds so scary or like really intense, and I'm like, but. Like I knew I was coming back, and that's where I tell people, like, just because I did this for a month, it does not compare to the experience of those people who are on the streets actually homeless. Like they don't have an exit plan or like the ability to go to a church and say, hey, I'm dying of tuberculosis. I'm actually a seminarian. Like I'm on a mission here. Like
you had an insurance policy,
tons of insurance policy, even if I didn't have it in my back pocket.
But it's still, I had to have shaped you.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's where I want to get to. I got a lot of questions, but then in the end, I want to see how this shaped you. You don't have to diminish. What you did is tough.
Yes.
For anyone, even if you had insurance policies. So you get off. So where do you sleep every night?
Yeah, I mean, the first few nights, public benches. You're trying.
So you are like they're not hooking you up and saying you're homeless, but you get to go to the Catholic Church homeless shelter every night to sleep.
I mean, if we wanted to, we could go to a shelter, but
you were just like anyone else. You didn't have like some special permit that gave you like first in line.
No. I mean, you can always reveal who you are, but they encourage you. The poverty immersion is always what you make out of it. You could go in and probably find a priest who's like, oh, 2 seminarians to serve for a month at my church. I'll give you a rectory, warm food, and like beds, and it would be as easy as that.
And they would let you do that?
You're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to.
But you can. It's sort of like sin. You're not supposed to, but you can. Like at the end of the day, they're not like, the church isn't going to be like, you can't do that, and if you do it, you're out. It's not like a test or a proving ground. But so like we went there, I packed very quickly. I grabbed like a coat that I thought was going to be warm enough. And I'm like, this is fine for Colorado in the winter. Mm-hmm. Like, and it wasn't warm at all. It was like terrible. I was like, what an idiot I was. And, you try to pack socks and the sort of the basics, but like, you don't really, I got like a little pouch bag, and that's all I could take. They're like, here's a pouch bag, take, whatever you can fit in there. You got 20 minutes, we're leaving.
Oh man, I would have been shoving everything in there.
Yeah, it's like, go.
I would have had a mattress in that thing now.
Yeah, right. You have a mattress. We had the guys who had gone on our immersion the year before they ran over and they're like, okay, you're doing this. Here's the down low. Like, take your $5 and go buy a library pass. That's a tip. If you're ever homeless, library. That's the place to go.
Really?
Yeah, because it's warm. There's typically showers. There's social workers.
There's showers in libraries?
In most public libraries, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Like if you go onto DU's campus, there's a couple of showers in that library.
Really?
Yeah. It's like a lot of people don't realize that public libraries are a huge resource, because if a homeless person needs to like apply for a job, or like, everything has to be done through technology these days.
Yeah.
Where are they getting access to a computer and that kind of stuff, or the information or the knowledge, or maybe they're taking classes. They do a lot. I mean, you can do a lot of things, and you do have a lot of time in some respects. So public libraries are your greatest asset, and typically you can get a pass for $5 or $10. So they're like, that's the first place you go. And then they kept telling us other things, and we're like, we got to go now. So
yeah,
that's the only real tidbit I got before I went.
So you get $5. When it's gone, it's gone.
It's gone, yeah.
You don't get any more.
I mean, you can beg for more.
Okay, so you don't get any more. Could you take the $5, invest in? I mean, I'm making this up on the spot, right? So don't make fun of me, people.
Yeah.
But could you go buy balloons, blow up a bunch of balloons, hand them out to kids for $1 a piece, make $20? Like, could you try to better yourself, or do you, or is that frowned upon? I guess that would be the opposite of. I don't know. It may teach you something about poverty. I don't know.
No, yeah. I mean, it's yours to spend how you will. I'll tell you what, with $5, like that didn't even cross my mind of like, maybe I can go and start an enterprise or, like a balloon enterprise. And then
I'm just thinking there's a YouTube
suddenly
guy.
The sheriff's office is getting this creepy guy's handing out balloons, and he looks sort of homeless too. And
my son's told me about this YouTube guy that does that. Like, he'll go homeless for like a certain amount of time with $1 and see how much he can end up with at the end.
Oh yeah.
I know that's not the point. It's more just, I'm just so curious about this process. So do you have to look homeless?
No,
or that just happens?
It just happens. Quite honestly, I really thought, like, on the bus out, you start thinking about your strategies, and like you're like, wow, this is going to be a piece of cake. I've got somewhat like. I'm 24 at the time.
Oh, so this was only 2 years ago.
Yeah.
This is recent.
This
Wow.
24 at the time.
By the way, when my son came back from football and was like, hey, my coach is going to be a priest, and he lived homeless I was like, ain't a chance. and I argued with him. Like, I know, no, son, that didn't happen. And then when I met you and you're like, yeah, that happened, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is the coolest thing.
Yeah, you get that reaction a lot. I mean, I've heard all sorts of the poverty immersion's so powerful, so very powerful to so many people. And now I was thinking, I'm like, technically I was 23, so I wasn't really even 24. I turned 24 April of that year. But yeah, it was very recent, and you're on the bus, you're thinking like, what am I going to do? There's maybe like a fist fight breaking out in the back of the Greyhound bus. Someone's like throwing up 3 rows in front of you, and the guy next to you, because you couldn't get a seat with your buddy, which you're not really even encouraged to do. I was
going to ask, how much do you guys coordinate when you're in the city? Do you guys hang together, or do you separate?
Once you're in the city, I mean, it's up to you once again, but I mean, they encourage coordination. You 2 by 2, and so we did coordinate. Like, you coordinate what kind of look. Like, you start thinking about basic things: heat, firewood.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, like it becomes eventually.
Like, it all sounds until it gets 5 o'clock on a January night in Kansas City, and the wind starts blowing, and you have nowhere to sleep.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't even know what you do.
Yeah, you get wise pretty quick. That's for sure. Trash.
Or die, right?
Yeah,
you get wise or die. Yeah.
You get wise or die. We tried to do more of a roughing it style, and very quickly they had a very bad January that year, and we were like, we either got to go into a shelter or figure something out, otherwise we're going to freeze. It wasn't like, I think they got like 2 feet of snow at the very start of that month, and I was like, there's no way. What we ended up doing is, there's an organization called Simple House in Kansas City. They are technically, I'm pretty sure they're a Christian organization, but if you don't know, Kansas City has a ton of abandoned properties, just properties. It's a city not like Denver. I don't know. Coming from Denver, I was like, oh, I know homelessness and the poor and everything, but you start to experience a different side of the city in your poverty, and you also get to see a different. Kansas City got really hit hard in the 60s with the civil riots, the racial riots, and I can't even imagine lately they must be, because they used to have a very segregated neighborhoods within the city, and what happened is, when the riots happened in the 60s, when MLK was assassinated, you learn the history of your city when you're homeless too. This is another cool thing. All the people who could move out of the city in the 60s did move out of the city. And they went to Johnson County, which is the 3rd richest county in the nation, Kansas City, who would think there would be such a rich county? Well, literally it sucked all the wealth out of the city, and you had these beautiful old neighborhoods where houses were suddenly abandoned. So we were able to get into a house that no running water, no heat, broken windows through a simple house, but at least it was like wood and structural, and it had a roof over your head, and it had a fireplace that keeping a fire going in a fireplace, while difficult when you're using wet wood, is way easier than having to like I was telling my mom about this whole ordeal.
So you were in an abandoned house using the fireplace.
Yeah, literally, if you looked at our neighborhood, there are 3 houses down in any direction, abandoned houses. The block next to us they just bulldoze them because they don't know what to do. I mean, they have
because homeless people like you are living in them.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they don't want to happen.
I know we're laughing. It's no laughing matter though. Like when you think about this is somebody's reality.
Yep.
And the danger in doing that, starting a fire in a fireplace that could just completely burn down at night while you're sleeping. Like there's just so much about that.
The parent in you, just like I can see it, like because that's exactly what my mom. When I was telling my mom and dad about this afterwards, they're like, "Well, you could have carbon monoxide," or like, "What if did anyone watch the fire?" And I'm like, like I would have loved to have watched the fire, but you're tired. I mean, you've cut your wood. The way you get wood in the city is you get 2 feet of snow and a lot of trees get downed, especially in these neighborhoods. And so another thing you try to get very quickly is tools, right? An axe. We did have to go and buy an axe, which you are allowed to do that. In seminary, you give up going and buying things, but obviously when you're on your own and begging and I'll get into that in a second about what people give you and everything. But you need basics. And so one of the first things we did is we bought an axe because we're going to need heat. And even a fireplace, it doesn't keep you, I was like,
it goes all up the chimney.
Yeah. There's no way. There were days, when you step into a hot shower at like the library where like 10 minutes of it was just like your feet like coming out of that numbness, that coldness. I don't know. Maybe if you ever been skiing or snowshoeing and like you get that, but like it's different when you go a whole day or multiple days.
Well,
of cold.
I mean, this is not even comparable. So anybody listening is rolling their eyes. I know it's not comparable, but when I deer hunt, I mean, I have the best of the best gear I can buy because I don't like to be cold. And so I'll buy Sitka gear. It's expensive. It's nice. I'll buy the best boots, best gloves. And I'm sitting sometimes from daylight to dark in one spot. And now you're doing that at night when it's even colder. But there's nothing, if you haven't experienced the level of cold that you can have by sitting sedentary in a cold environment, like you walk in that same, I could be walking through the woods and be totally fine.
Yeah.
I sit down for 2 or 3 hours and I get cold to the core, to the point that it makes you so tired you can't even like keep your eyes, like it zaps you. I can't, again, I'm not comparing my experience. I do that for fun. I don't understand that either, but I do. But I can't even imagine the experience that you had. You didn't have all the great equipment, all the great gear. You weren't doing it for fun.
No.
And you were there 24/7. I got to go and have a reprieve at the end of the day. Like, oh my gosh, I just can't even fathom it.
That's why the library is nice. You're like, this is heated. We, and that became your resource. You give up media, but all of those like fasts that we do, they're off for poverty immersion. So like we could go on a computer and look up like food or like homeless shelter, and we stayed away from shelters. We didn't want to go the homeless shelter route.
Does the library run homeless people off?
No, they're pretty good. I mean, unless you're causing problems, they're not going to run you out. Yeah. And thanks be to God, I know, and I trust me. I was a poli-sci major in college. I know where people are coming from when they are like, we need to clear the camps out, or like. And I'm like, but you also don't realize like that camp that's all they have, and like your gear is all you got, and it's precious, and you're trying to like
Yeah, so it could be a cardboard box with a bunch of dirty crap, but to you, that's like
it's everything.
It's everything. So when people tear these, and I probably lean on the side of cleaning stuff up, so I'm not trying to act like a saint here.
Yeah. No, same here. I mean,
yeah, but when you do that, it's like if you don't create an environment for people to go, you're just perpetuating the problem. Even worse, right? You're making your
well, and the problem is very quickly, like the vast majority of the homeless in Kansas City, very microcosm of an experience here. But I always tell this to people, and because I think this shocked me. This absolutely blew my mind. 65% of them, 60, 70, the vast majority of the homeless that I encountered were veterans. And you can set up a shelter that is beautiful and perfect, but if they won't go into it because of a mental health issue, it really doesn't matter. I mean, and part of our ministry, what we decided very quickly is we would friendship ministry. We wanted to be friends and meet as many homeless people and talk and get to know them and get to know their life, because we're only there for a month. Even if we're living it, hearing their stories is how you're actually going to learn about it. And just the vast majority, and some of them we found, like, even over the course of a month of approaching and trying to get close with them, they weren't in a place where they could receive us. And that's heartbreaking as a guy who at one point in college was like, everything can be fixed with policy and economics, and like a typical 20-year-old, you're like, I can fix the world and I've got the education.
I think it's a typical it's every politician lately.
Yep. Yeah. And
like everything can be fixed with policy, but it's a spiritual battle.
It absolutely.
I mean, there's way more. I mean, policy is great, but ultimately it's a spiritual battle.
You're standing there and you're like, I can't even talk with this guy. How'd you expect to get him? You could bring in the best counsel. Like some of these guys, and they've tried. I mean, you had from the Vietnam War up to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and they just were not. We had Saint Paula is what I called her. Her name was Paula, but she was a saint. She was homeless for 15 years. Out of those 7 years, she talked to no one.
So 7 of the 15.
7 of the 15. Either 7 or 10. I always get that mixed up. But whatever it was, a ridiculous amount of time to talk or not be acknowledged by anyone. And the fact that we can have people in our society that can sort of just be forgotten like that is very scary. Very scary, because, I mean, for just me as an individual, I'm like, wow, this person can be forgotten about. I know one of the immersions, they go to houses of the dying run by the Sisters of Calcutta, Mother Teresa's order, if you've ever heard of her. She was she's a saint now, but she did a lot of work with the poor in India. And this order, they have these houses of the dying, and they go in and they take care of people who are dying, who are terminally ill, who have no one to take care of them. And the guys coming from there, they'd say, like, they'd go into these places and these people are just dying in no dignity. Their family has either left them in an apartment or, alone, and they've been forgotten. And so their job, we're not trying to cure or just to give them dignity in their death. And those were some powerful stories to hear. I mean, I listening to those guys talk about it. But on the other end, the poor, an Air Force veteran. She was in the Desert Storm operations.
This is Paula?
Paula, yeah. And she was one of those para-nurses that would jump and like rescue and help take care of soldiers. And I'm like, here you are sitting. I mean, now she was living in a place and had been reached out to and just is doing phenomenal. But the fact that the sacrifice she gave and this is how we. So that blew my mind. Just the fact that we have the vast majority of them are veterans. You do have drug addicts. You do have alcoholics. You do have just mentally ill people. I met a former CEO of, I think, what bank was it? Wells Fargo, a Fortune 500 company, former CEO, and something snapped in his life. Something went wrong, and it was snowball effect, and he was homeless, which just goes to show you that like anything can change at the spur of the moment. And he had everything. And that boggled my mind. Great guy, very interesting to talk to, Harvard educated. And you could tell that. I'm like, way more intelligent than me. We met a former seminarian. And that was really interesting. This guy had gone to seminary in like the 70s and just fell away from the faith. And I was like, oh, gosh, here's someone who at one point was discerning
what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell me about your experience. We talked about this briefly before the podcast, your experience with having to beg for money and what that taught you. You had a lot to say about it before, so I'll just let you start.
Totally. You think it's easy to beg for money. It is not. I'll tell you that. This is coming from someone who was like, I was a student body president. I can sell anything. Like, put me in front of it. I want to be a priest. I want to literally go out and preach the gospel. I'm surely I can get some I do fundraising for the Catholic Church right now.
That's what you do now.
That's the ironic thing.
So you took what you learned and you're doing it.
The funny thing is, I had a kid, one of our CCD kids. He was like, we were taught, my fundraising came up and someone was like, he does such a good job of it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, and this kid says, well, that's because he knows how to ask for money. He had to do it for a month as a homeless person.
Maybe that's why the Catholic Church does this.
Right. No, yeah. They need to get but
it's
boy,
a fundraising program.
He said that, and I'm like, that was a very insightful comment coming from a 12-year-old. I had never thought about that. It just didn't go together in my mind. But
so when you would beg, you would go to like a street corner. You'd be like, are we talking? Like, explain what that would look like.
Downtown in Kansas City, right by the plaza. If you're from Kansas City, the plaza and the big library right across that river. It was a golden place. They literally. You would have rotations, 4 guys on each, or 1 guy on each corner, and it was understood 20 minutes on a corner, and then you got to switch off.
Oh, it was an unwritten rule, huh?
Yeah, there are a lot of unwritten rules about how like street corners work, and yeah, the number of times that people ask, they're like, "What should I do? What should I do?" Like, interesting how we love to talk about like, what should I do? And what should I do when I see a homeless person? Should I give them money? Like, I don't believe in giving them money. They're going to go and spend it on alcohol or like,
yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, first, before you get into that whole doing thing, why don't you just acknowledge them? Say hello, wave, smile, nod your head. It's cold outside and you don't want to roll down your window because you are tired and you don't want to have a conversation with a crazy guy. Like, that in and of itself is a huge dignity that you can give to the person. Acknowledgement.
So when they hear me click my lock button, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how much you notice just sitting there.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because you're you're standing for hours and up in the, I called it like the window effect, where it was as if you were on their left-hand side, they'd pull up to the light, and suddenly they had the most intense patch of dirt on the right side of their window, or either there was a vision of Christ appearing to them, and like they were so focused on that upper right-hand side, and I was like, dude, like, you don't have to pretend I'm not here. But here's the crazy thing. That happens once and you're like, DK, what's your ego? Like, do you need to be acknowledged all the time? I do have a big ego, admittedly, the Lord knows. But imagine that for hours, or just repeatedly being like ignored by people. how dehumanizing that is. And, you know, the greatest, I always say the greatest rejection in mankind's history is our rejection of Christ on the cross. And so the beauty of that is when you're begging, you get to participate in his rejection on the cross. If we ever feel alone or lonely, depending on how you look at, you know, that's not always the same. Just remember that Christ was pretty much alone on that cross, bearing the weight of all of our sins. And there's something powerful about that. And anyone who has ever been homeless, like, they're participating in that rejection. I mean, that is Christ. We are literally, because that's who we're called to go out. It's easy to love people who love you, who are easy, you know, just lovable. It's like it's why everyone loves dogs. Like, what's there not to love about a dog? They're going to come and like wag your tail.
The opposite with cats.
Yeah, right. Cats go to scratch you, but like, what's?
But on that, so I'm probably one of the people that looks up and right, so I don't have to look over to my left and see this homeless person begging for money.
I do it
Part
too.
of it is because let's talk through this. I want to hear your view on this after being in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is I feel like by giving, I'm enabling.
Sure.
Okay. I'm probably not. I feel that way. By giving, I'm just helping a drug addict. I'm just helping somebody buy alcohol. My business partner, Mark, always says, well, even if somebody's taking advantage of the situation, if they need money so bad they're going to sit on a corner and beg, they need it worse than you. And it's a good perspective. And so it caused me to probably give more. But then part of me is like, well, by giving, now I'm encouraging them to do it more. Mm-hmm. So there's all these things that go through my head, right? So I know I sound like a terrible person right now, but trust me, if you're listening, you've had the same thoughts.
Yeah.
And so
Everyone
then
has.
It's like, okay, but I want to be friendly to these people.
Yep.
I want to smile at them. I want to say, hey, have a great day, wave at them. But then I feel like, if I do that, I feel more guilty than I do of just not even looking at them, because then it's like, it's almost patronizing. I almost feel like I'm patronizing them. It's like,
sure,
I'm going to say hi to them, but I'm going to do nothing to help them.
Yeah.
And so I explain, like, what's your thought on that? Like, what's the right response there?
So first off, it's like,
because nobody, and let me just say one other thing,
yeah.
and this is going to sound terrible. But I think if you're honest and listening to this, you probably feel the same way. Nobody wants to see homeless people in every corner of their town holding up signs. It's just not a great appearance. So then you're like, well, if I give, now I'm encouraging them to come back, right?
Sure.
And so there's all of that going on. So anyhow, fast forward to your journey.
Yep.
Or rewind to your journey. And like, so what advice would you give us as we're listening to handle that situation properly?
Sure. Yeah, no. And it's like, even though I've gone through this, I still drive up and to a light. And when there's a homeless person and it's been a long day, you're coming home from a day long of ministry, and it's like, oh gosh, I don't really want to talk. I'm tired. I've worked. I got to save some for the family, you know, whatever it is. I get that. And even going through it. So like, I don't even think you have to worry or ever like justify that thought. We all have thoughts. Can't really control those, right? But how we respond to those thoughts. Now, imagine if you were talking with God, and he's not to say that he never does this, but and not that I'm saying you're God in this situation, but, or even just a friend. I would prefer to be acknowledged than just ghosted.
Even if I don't give you money in that sense, like if you were back in Kansas City and I drove up to you in a nice new silver shiny truck, and I look over and I'm like, hey man, smile at you.
How's your day going?
You're not ticked off at me. You actually feel acknowledged, and
totally.
You think other homeless people feel that way?
Oh yeah, because what they're suffering, the greatest indignant. Look, we're not a nation we don't have a resource problem here in America. Like some might argue that, and not to diminish, like what food shelters, pantries and all that's doing. And that's why we don't. I mean, like, you can get food, you can get shelter. Like, that's not the problem at the core of the issue here. The problem is, at least how I see it, is we don't want to see the poor. We don't want to see the weak in our society. We're all weak. They don't want to see the vulnerable in our society. And when you start ignoring a person, they feel less and less human. And that sounds like a great strategy to just beat them up, take away what makes them, sons and daughters of God, and like a plan of the devil. So that simple acknowledgement, even if you're going to give them nothing, and sure, you might pull up to some guy who's going to shout and yell at you or go off, but like, that's part of being human. Like, you're encountering something. It's just as good for you as it is for them.
So you would encourage us to interact with a smile, a wave, hey, how are you doing? I don't know. I think that's like asking that question to a homeless person. I just feel like, well, if I were them, I'd say, how do you think I'm doing?
Yeah.
Begging here on the corner.
Totally. What's your name? Of course, like, there's the idea of being man, I feel like I'm patronizing these people, but like, it's just as good to you. Why do you feel like you're being patronizing? Is there something in there that's telling you need to do more? The reason we ignore is because there's something we want to disconnect. It's an uncomfort. I'm looking for the word here. We are uncomfortable with our inability to change or do something about this. And that is my experience in poverty, is that these experiences, you are not going to help. In fact, the poor will help you more than you will help the poor, without a doubt, no doubt. In your interactions, you will learn more, you will grow in greater relationship. That I am fully convinced of. If you grow, why are you uncomfortable with saying hi? Or, okay, you're patronizing. Let's go through that. Why do you think is it that, like, an authentic encounter of just being like, hi, what's your name? What's wrong with that? Why is that so?
No, it's probably pretty powerful. It's challenging to me.
And if he comes back and is like, I'm having a crappy day, like, come on, man. Like, okay, he just was vulnerable, or like totally, just piled on your opinion, or your encounter. What's that? Oh, like, how's that? Why are you? What's the reaction in you? Do you need to be affirmed? Do you need to realize that, like, do you need to fix in that situation? Like, there's so many powerful spiritual things that could go on there. And we would rather be looking up at the billboard in that upper right-hand corner when we have an authentic encounter with someone who can change your life.
That's great. Well, for time purposes, let's. I got a couple questions here, and then we'll kind of wrap up. But what's your biggest takeaway from this experience, and what would be your greatest your piece, or a couple pieces of advice you would give to the listeners on maybe, I don't know, how to deal with poverty, how to maybe put themselves in a situation to be more sensitive to it.
For sure. I mean, one of the questions I always get, they're like, should I give them money? And I'm like, that's something you got to discern. I will say there is a ton of dignity in choice. The Father loved us in giving us the choice to sin and totally break away from him. Giving a person a choice every day to go and take that money and, buy alcohol. I saw it. I mean, heck, I could have gone and done. Not to say I might have gone and grabbed a whiskey, like one of those little shooters. I was like, but like, that's a choice. There's dignity in that. That is beautiful, and we need that. But there's also that weird equation of enabling a person, and you don't want to enable, but you also don't have to fix or control or what is your money for? Are you trying to, and I talk about this in fundraising, are you giving your money, or are you controlling where your money is going? Are you truly just, here it is? And I get we live in a world where money gets misused. It happens in the Catholic Church. It happens everywhere. And so I do get that. But, what is this journey about? Okay, how am I growing in closeness to God and in the greatest goal of meeting him in heaven, of seeing him face to face in heaven? And then what's your vocation and the greater, your family? How am I leading them to heaven and that closer relationship with Jesus? And when you start to think about that, do you think Jesus, when you go up to heaven, is really going to be like, you enabled someone to go and buy alcohol? Like you should have been more controlling of that.
Yeah, he's not holding you accountable for what somebody does with your gift. He's holding you accountable for what if you gave the gift that he called you to give, right? So
for sure,
it's the same thing. Like a lot of people want to control how they give money to the church, or they have a hard time just giving and then trust. It's like, well, if somebody misappropriates your money or does something wrong with the money you gave, the onus isn't on you. You did what God called you to do. Now, we want to be good stewards, and if we see that happening over and over again, then we need to do something different.
Yep.
But I do agree with that mindset.
And it's tough.
And there is a control. I think if you give but have a ton of control in your gift, I think it's a much different gift than giving without control, 100%.
For sure.
The Jewish faith talks about that. I think it's called the tzedakah. I think it's probably saying that wrong too. But it's levels of giving.
Yep.
And giving with control is a different level than giving without control.
Yeah. And to go back to what did I learn? Quite honestly, you see, I did not realize, I think something I saw when I was begging is how poverty really does scare people. We talked about this a little bit, but I really think that avoidance, most of the time, where you look to that upper right-hand corner of the window, I do it too. It's a recognition somewhere deep down, because our body is not stupid. It knows truth. It knows, it can sense it. I think we really do have a smell for it. And we know deep down that talking about control, we are not in control. Mm-hmm. We are not able to fix ourselves. We were talking about that last time. And just like that person sitting on the street, I could be there in the blink of an eye. Mm-hmm. I could be that person through no fault of my own, or through every fault of my own, but also knowing I can mess up, and I will probably mess up. And why did this guy get drafted and go through all that and not me? Why did, what's the distinguisher there? Well, that's really just God's providence, his plan for the world. And that's scary. That's really scary to think that in a second, I am driving my Audi whatever, and I could be the person begging for food or for money, or not able to control my mental health, my faculties, whatever it is. And I was like, wow, that's a big fear. I mean, I think that's getting at a core issue here, where what's the fear of death? It's a fear you're losing, you're giving up. We can't control our death. We can't control our time. We can't control, we can sort of control, well, not right. That's a whole theological subject of where we're going. And, but those are all scary thoughts. Man, the phone is way easier. The radio is way easier. Listening to Patrick Mahomes' throwing stats in the playoff, I heard those on the radio too. And is way easier. And we're all guilty of it, of take that easy check down route and call it good, and we won't think about these tougher issues. And I think that's what the poor really is. It's just this encounter with someone who is weak and vulnerable, and it's an acknowledgement of our own vulnerability.
Yeah, and it probably scares us because we know that it could require something of us. I think one of the big takeaways for me from your experiences is that it doesn't always have to be money. It could just be not marginalizing someone and being kind to them.
Totally.
Showing them the love of Christ, treating them like a human. And also, I do think there's a fear. I think it's the same fear as people have in walking out discipleship, as they know that discipleship requires relationship.
Yep.
And when you get into a relationship with somebody, there's a chance many times that it will require something of you. And so when I look at that person, and hey, I'm talking to myself right now. When I look at that person begging on the side of the road, and I say something to them, it's almost easier to give them $5 or $1 and not say something.
Absolutely.
It's probably the scariest thing to do is probably start a conversation with them, because they may say something that then the Holy Spirit prompts you that would require you to give something that's much harder than money, which is your time. But I think, WWJD, right?
Yeah.
I'm not. Sometimes that drives me nuts, but I do think, like, what would Jesus? I don't know that when Jesus was walking that he would have walked around giving him money. He probably would have said, "I don't have any money, but I have something much better.
It's really,
come follow me," right? And that's what he would do.
Yeah.
And we have the opportunity to do that as well. And I don't know. Your story is really challenging to me in that sense. And I probably do marginalize the poor. And I'm convicted that I probably do at times.
We all do.
Like, think that somehow it's a choice that they're making. And even if it is a choice, it's because they have a mental illness to make that choice, And so, this is a good challenge for me.
It really is, and it was a challenge for me. I mean, that whole year shook me to the core. It revealed wounds, parts of my heart that I was not willing to give to the Lord. If you marry someone, if you enter into a vocation with the church, you really have to hopefully be willing to give your whole heart to that person. And ultimately, the goal is to give our heart entirely to God when we meet him face to face. And I just realized there are parts in my heart that I guard, that I know that I don't want to give. I'm not willing to give over that control. And that was something I knew I walked away. I had to work on. And then also just something you worry about when you're going to live a celibate life is, are you going to be alone? Like, I don't want to be alone. I don't, at least for a young man, that's something that's popping into my head a lot when I discern the priesthood. And that still pops into my head. But something that is a little more reassuring to me is whenever I'm in that state of loneliness or rejection, I've done something wrong or bad, or people don't like what I'm saying or whatever. Well, I'm participating in Christ's crucifixion. I'm there with him. That's I'm going to the loneliest place and trying to be there with him. And the poor, in a sense, that's the beauty of it. Is you go and have a conversation with them. Imagine you're having a conversation with Christ on the cross, because they're lonely. There's a rejection there from our society there. So maybe your conversation will be nonsense, and maybe it won't make any sense. And I can always throw out a counter. I'm like, why does your conversation have to be productive or make sense or, normal? Go with the mentally ill or the PTSD and let them do their thing. Mm-hmm. And realize that probably some of the uncomfort there is, oh boy, that could be me, or oh boy, I don't know how to be closer to this person. And that's a scary thought too. How can I help? If I can't help this person, how can I help myself? Mm-hmm. And live and sit in those realities. It's a beautiful thing to do. We all need breaks, and we all need to have normal life and normal times, but those reflections were incredible. Another tip, if you don't want to give the poor money and you don't want to give the poor just your acknowledgement, you can give them healthy food. Give them blueberries. Give them fruit. And don't go to McDonald's and get a cheeseburger. And I know this sounds presumptuous, but or maybe a little snotty or picky, but I came back from that month and had 2 cavities. I had actually gained weight because what you do when someone offers you a donut, they're like, hey, I have some donuts. You eat it, right? And
my brother's a firefighter, and we were just talking about gaining weight recently when I was back in Illinois, and he was like, you don't understand how hard it is. Like when the Domino's delivery man goes to deliver pizza and it was like a false address, they bring it by the police department. When like every middle school the kids are baking cookies and bringing pies. And he's like, every day I go to work, there's like pizzas and pies and cookies. He's like, do you know how hard that? I'm like, I don't even know how you do it, man. That would be like impossible. Anyhow, I just went down a complete sidetrack, but it would be the same thing. I mean, much different, but in the sense, like when people give it to you, eat it.
You eat it because,
especially in that sense, because you're starving.
Well, you might not even be starving, but what happens if I reject your offering? Mm-hmm. What if I say, no, I really don't, because then you're like worried, at least as a homeless person, living that, I'm like, what if that really makes them hesitant? They're like, because you do get that. You're like, well, hey, I'm giving you food. Like, this is, why are you rejecting help? Well, food's great, but like, why do you eat a McDonald's and a donut anytime anyone offers it to you?
There's been times in my life.
For sure. College was totally that time.
Well, DK, for your sake, we got to wrap this up because you're going to be late.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Both these podcasts were a bit lengthy, but it's because it was great conversation, man. I loved having you on the show. We'll have to do another one. So many takeaways, so many challenges, especially around the poor and poverty, our mindset around it, and just some little things that we can do to really make a difference in some people's lives and show them the love of Christ. And your story is fascinating. I'm glad you shared it with us, and I appreciate your time and for being here, and just wish you the best, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Keep me in your prayers, okay?
Yeah,
if you made it all the way through, good on you.
Oh, sure. You were fascinating. Of course they made it through. Well, guys, until next time, thanks so much for being part of this podcast and what we're trying to do here with Ordinary Men. And just keep up your walk with God. Keep pursuing Him in intimacy. And hopefully something we talked about today will help strengthen you in your walk. And who knows, maybe change the life of someone that is in your town begging on the corner as we speak. So,
or yours.
Or your life. That's right. That's right. Who knows what God may reveal to you through that. That's great. That's a great reminder, DK. So until next time, let's do this. Thank you guys so much.